It's the verdict that has rocked headlines. It's divided timelines and reignited a debate over fame, power, and justice. Today, Sean Diddy Combs was found not guilty in the federal RICO case filed against him by the Southern District of New York. He was acquitted also of sex trafficking and racketeering charges, but he was convicted of two prostitution related charges. Well, with this verdict, the courts have spoken. Now it's time to ask, what does this mean? Is this a setback for RICO cases involving sexual violence? Is this the momentum behind MeToo being brought to a halt? Or does this mean the MeToo movement is evolving because we saw two victims take the witness stand? And what will this verdict mean for Diddy's legacy and for hip hop culture? Well, to get all of these questions answered, I assembled one of the best teams in the business. Joining me now are Gerald Griggs. He's a civil rights and criminal defense attorney. Dr. Omekongo Dibinga. He's a political analyst and expert on hip hop culture. And Nancy Erika Smith. She is one of the nation's most respected attorneys for victims' rights and workplace discrimination. And happy to say all of these esteemed professionals are friends and colleagues. So I'm so happy to be joined by all of you today. This news has the internet, quite frankly, Gerald, divided. Folks outside of that courtroom shouting and cheering for the verdict, saying that this was the right outcome. Others saying this was a travesty of justice. So I want to begin with you, and let's begin with the law. What do you think this verdict says about prosecutors using the RICO statute to go after predators like Sean Diddy Combs?
I think it shows that you cannot overreach sometimes. I was concerned about the RICO count in this particular case from the very beginning because I didn't see proof beyond a reasonable doubt in the case of trafficking and RICO conspiracy. So I think this is the right verdict with regard to the facts of this case and the evidence that the government put forward. But I also don't think it's a setback for the movement to bring rights. You know, I think in situations where you have criminal enablers and you have a RICO conspiracy and enterprise is actually being used to do that, I think the government will be successful. They have been successful in the past and will continue to be. But I think in this particular case, the government did not have compelling evidence of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And I think the jury got it right.
Well, one of the things, Gerald, we are hearing about, a lot of the experts are saying, is that unlike your typical RICO case where you have a mob underboss on the witness stand pointing the finger at the defense table at the mob boss saying, this is the guy that directed me to commit arson. This is the guy that directed me to carry out this hit. You know, this is the guy that directed me to commit these crimes. It's a little easier for people to wrap their heads around that being a criminal conspiracy. In this case, there weren't any co-conspirators, and we didn't see any witnesses take the witness stand that pointed to Sean Combs saying he forced me to do something. In fact, the witnesses said, I didn't even know that, I was participating in quote unquote a criminal enterprise. How much of a difference do you think it made in this case not having those co-conspirators there or witnesses that could point the finger at Sean Combs?
You always have to have those witnesses. You have to have witnesses that show the predicate acts that prove that there's a criminal enterprise and that the subject of the criminal enterprise are those underlying charges. So I think that was a weakness of the government's case. But I want to push back a little bit on this. RICO cases have been used against individuals who are not a part of organized crime. You simply have to look at the R. Kelly case where it was proven for the Mann Act violations and sex trafficking. So it can be used, but you have to have those witnesses that connect the dots and show the evidence as proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
No, and that's a great point. We definitely saw RICO be successful in that Chicago prosecution of R. Kelly. He is still serving time today as a result of being found guilty for RICO charges in a case that has a lot of similarities, although some differences. Obviously, in R. Kelly's case, there were allegations of underage sexual acts committed by R. Kelly. But Nancy, I want to ask you, you're a victims' rights attorney. We have been, you and I, together on shows talking about the progress of the MeToo movement. What do you think this says about the status of the movement, and were you surprised at all by this verdict?
I was surprised by the verdict. I thought that the evidence did show the trafficking. I agree on RICO and hardly would argue with a criminal defense lawyer because that's not what I do. But I did watch very closely on the trafficking. I saw coercion, beatings, one on video, witnesses who said she was beaten when she wouldn't participate in sex acts that she said were degrading. The use of drugs, extortion is coercion. Extortion, I'm going to show videos of you having sex. The mother being involved and extorted, the threats, the financial threats of retaliation. And I believe that he threw a Molotov cocktail on Cassie Ventura's boyfriend's car. So that to me is coercion. In the 80s, we saw the development of the theory of domestic abuse and the battered women syndrome. And I really believe that the two women who bravely testified in this case were in that syndrome. So what could be accepted as consent was not welcomeness. And there's a difference between welcomeness and consent. Even the United States Supreme Court recognizes that. I don't think that what was happening to these women was welcome, but I think that they were beaten down by a very controlling, very threatening, violent man with toxic masculinity and, you know, certainly not normal sexual proclivities that I don't believe that they voluntarily wanted to participate in. They did it because they were in abusive relationships with him. And I think that the coercion was proven for the trafficking charge. But on the other hand, I'm sort of upset that the news is, you know, he was acquitted, he lost. He was convicted of trafficking girlfriends for prostitution. Each carries a 10-year sentence. The judge can take into account all of the behavior and all of the evidence that took place in this trial, in the sentencing. He could have consecutive 10-year sentences, so he could spend 20 years in prison. I think a lot of victims out there are hurt and that the messaging may be hurting them more. He was convicted of 2 serious felonies. I think he also should have been convicted of trafficking because I think there was overwhelming evidence of coercion.
Gerald, let me have you respond to that. I agree with Nancy. We saw evidence of, we heard testimony from these witnesses, not just Cassie and Jane, but other witnesses like Dante, the stylist, that talked about instances, times when neither of these women wanted to participate in these freak-offs, but they were threatened with violence. They were threatened with sex tapes being released that would ruin their careers. They were threatened with the withholding of money. Why wasn't that testimony enough? Because the jury instruction said if there's just one instance of that type of coercion, that would have been sufficient to find him guilty.
Well, you know, the jury sits as a finder of fact, and obviously they didn't find proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and there may have been some credibility issues that the jury saw. I think that it's incumbent upon us to actually hear from the jury, because again, I'm not saying I wasn't fully surprised by the outcome, but I didn't think that there was sufficient RICO charges. And again, some of the trafficking, I didn't see the there. And so I think that we need to ultimately speak with them. But again, they are the final arbiters and determiners of the credibility of the witnesses. And I think they had some issues with proving the credibility beyond a reasonable doubt. So I hear other counsel saying that they thought that there was sufficient evidence, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's a jury that makes the determination, and they said it wasn't enough there. Now, I agree. Some of the very disturbing, violent testimony that we heard, I thought this case should have been brought a long time ago in state court, where many of these acts would have been proven to even harsher standards for actual criminal conduct that's illegal in the state of New York. It's illegal most places. But, you know, when they decide to bring it in federal court under the RICO statute and the trafficking statute, they have to prove those predicate acts. They have to prove them beyond a reasonable doubt. And I just don't think they met that standard.
No doubt about it. The RICO statute is a complicated statute. The jury instructions alone were multiple pages. And when people think of RICO, again, they're thinking about mob cases. I know, Gerald, you're right. There are cases that have been prosecuted that are not mob or gang cases, but that's just kind of the general image that people have when they hear about the RICO statute. Dr. Dibinga, I want to get you into this conversation. During the closing argument by the defense team, they made a lot of comments that were quite offensive, I think, to women, to victims' rights lawyers like myself. Comments like this was a modern day love story, like Cassie Ventura was the biggest winner because she had these civil settlements, and at one point referred to her as a gangster. What impact do you think those references will have, not just on victims who may find themselves in similar situations and afraid to come forward, but also just on the culture as we think about the Me Too movement?
Well, somebody who's also, been out there just posting and seeing comments and responses to my post, those comments are already traveling, and they are already being utilized by people who are calling her somebody who's a liar, a gold digger, and they're using this type of language, modern day love affair, she's the winner, and so on and so forth. And so we're already seeing in the court of public opinion, Cassie is being retried. And it's not like she's been back since she testified when she was 8 months pregnant, but they are still putting that out there. So we're already seeing society, in some spaces, not all, clearly, start to turn on Cassie. And that's extremely problematic when you talk about the culture, because we come from a culture in terms of hip hop culture that is built on misogyny, that is built on, misogynoir, directly hate towards black women. And when you see people who are saying things like, oh, she's lying, she's a gold digger, he's just another black man trying to make it, bringing in a lot of these Bill Cosby type references and the like, it's extremely problematic. I mean, this was the defense basically said, hey, we're fine with the whole domestic violence part. We accept that. We take that. That should have been enough. I'm talking about the court of public opinion for people to be done with him, because they were giving us that. But even that, people are saying, oh, well, you don't know what the situation was. Oh, she might have been this. They might have been that. She shouldn't have been in the building in the first place. So this trial is being used to the domestic violence part of it has already been excused. And hip hop, like other forms of music, has been very violent in terms of what they will talk about doing to women. And so this just adds fuel to the fire as it relates to that. And so you mentioned the Me Too comment earlier. I believe that this is an opportunity for us to use the convictions, because he is now a two-time felon, to look at how we can make hip hop accountable for its actions, its lyrics, and ultimately build another generation of people who will be more responsible with the culture.
No, absolutely. Thank you for bringing up the misogyny that we see in our society overall, the toxic masculinity that you talked about, Nancy, all very real. Nancy, we have seen some huge wins for survivors in the last 5 years or so, with Weinstein, with R. Kelly, even with Bill Cosby. How does this verdict impact those gains, you think?
Well, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that he's going to jail, probably for at least prison for at least 10 years. So there is some accountability, and I'm really happy for that. I do, we have a rapist in the White House. So, and Hegseth, I mean, the list of people in this administration who have been accused of sexual abuse, found guilty of sexual abuse, or paid to silence people for sexual abuse is extraordinary. So I do think we are experiencing a backlash to the Me Too movement. We have the Andrew Tates being invited to the White House. I definitely think we have that culture of admiring rich and powerful men, devaluing women, especially devaluing women of color. And I certainly get it. Law enforcement has been racist from the beginning of this country. Law enforcement has been racist, and Black men have been wrongfully accused of sexual abuse by racist law enforcement. But we have to move on from that, because the victims here are Black women, and they seem to be at the very bottom of the totem pole in terms of being protected. All women are not protected enough, but women of color in particularly are not protected because of a culture that lashes out at them. And I've represented many of them. Remember, Meredith Watson was one of 2 women who accused Justin Fairfax, the lieutenant governor of Virginia, of rape, and the abuse that she got and I got, being called racist because I represented her and made those allegations. And we had fresh complaint witnesses. We had tons of evidence about it. But so I do think the culture, it's both sides. He's been found guilty of something. He was finally charged with something, but the culture is definitely also experiencing a backlash against women and against us asserting our rights and having our voice. They want us to be silenced and just do whatever they want. And we have to fight back. And I know you are, Areva, every day.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the issue of race, Nancy. Gerald, let me ask you this. We don't know much about the makeup of this jury yet. We know it was 8 men. We knew it was 4 women. And I've been seeing some commentators, some talking heads say that the New York District Attorney's Office, the Southern District of New York, made a huge mistake by having 6 white women as the prosecutors, that the optics on that were bad, that could have had some impact on how jurors thought about this case. Again, this, the government coming down on a black man and using these 6 white women to do so. Talk about the role that the race of the prosecutors may have played, if any, in the outcome of this trial.
And that's a key conversation, but we have to remember the initial prosecution team that brought this case was the U.S. Attorney's Office under my good friend Damon Williams, who's an African American, who initially brought the charges. Now, there was an administration shift, and so the U.S. Attorney shifted in the Southern District of New York, and so it may have been a strategic mistake to not have more people of color on the prosecution team, because, again, there can always be that allegation of racial animus when you have a black defendant and all white prosecutors. And so I think that was a serious mistake. And ultimately, we need more diversity on both sides. I mean, we can also make the argument that there's a serious mistake. There wasn't enough African-American defense attorneys on Mr. Combs' team. And so, I mean, it can go both ways. And I want people to really understand this. He was convicted of 2 very serious felonies. And so there's still a sentencing hearing. And for people to be online talking about he beat the case, when you beat the case, that means you walk out. That means you get not guilty. These were 2 guilty convictions. And so now he has to go through a sentencing phase, and his lawyers have to put up mitigation. The prosecution will put up aggravation, and we will see what the judge does. And again, you have to remember, the judge is sitting as that 13th juror, heard all of this evidence, all of the evidence, and will make a determination on whether or not Mr. Combs sees the inside of a prison cell for a long time or is given probation. So all of those things are still on the table, but I think the determination of race cuts both ways.
It's so interesting, Gerald, that you say that about black prosecutors, because we know our beloved former vice president, presidential candidate Kamala Harris caught hell from black folk, a lot of them, as when she was a prosecuting attorney in San Francisco. And so I can remember having arguments with people about how hard we as black lawyers have fought to make sure that black lawyers are represented everywhere in the practice, not just on the civil side, but on the criminal side as both prosecutors and defense attorneys. So when you have black prosecutors, oftentimes they are tainted or maligned, I should say a better word, by the community and accused of locking up black folks. So it's interesting that you would say that, and you're right, this started under a black sitting U.S. attorney who actually brought these charges, a black male who has moved on to a private practice. So the race argument is really interesting. I actually had a white friend of mine make kind of the same argument. She's a lawyer, saying that the white women trying to bring down a black mogul, and they failed, and this was somehow a victory for black people. What do you think about that, Dr. Dibinga? I'll tell you what I said to her in response, but I'd love to get your response to that.
That a white woman would comment like that, it kind of speaks to a larger issue of how people feel like they can speak to our community and about our community. And my mentality is like, no conversations about us without us. And so I find that mindset problematic. But when she said that, she's saying as if it's a victory, in my opinion, for black men. And that kind of plays into the misogyny, because the fact of the matter is, if the late woman Jane and Cassie are basically not getting any direct justice from these verdicts, then they're basically, as Nancy was saying, back at the totem pole again. And if you're only looking at this from a mindset of, the fake notion that Diddy is going free, as Gerald was saying, he's not going free right now, then you're basically kind of looking at it like an O.J. Simpson case for 2025. And that's really problematic. The Black community, in my opinion, we lose because of this. We find us, if we choose not to hold Diddy and his people accountable, we are more divided. The bickering is continuing. People, and if Diddy gets out, he's going to have stories to tell about people who didn't come to his defense. And so I feel like more people within the hip hop community themselves are going to be silent as well, because they're afraid of retribution from him or the bodies that he knows that are buried, possibly literally. But I think also we need to be mindful of, as it relates to the cause of domestic violence itself, we also have to be mindful of the victories that have come as it relates to this. Cassie coming forward led to more allegations to people to come against Diddy that were afraid to come up. I also heard today that the domestic violence hotline, when Cassie was coming out of her story, spiked by 70, 50%, I don't know, in terms of calls by people who are also getting the courage to come up, so to come out about the things they've experienced. So just as Nancy was saying, we can't lose the narrative that there have actually been convictions here, just as Gerald was saying as well. There are also things that we can take from this that we can build on if we don't let the narrative of this Black man is going free who the nation tried to bring down. We can't let that narrative stick.
Yeah, and Gerald, I heard an anchor say that this morning, that this is this generation's OJ trial, and I wanted to throw up, quite frankly, because as we've all been saying, no, this is not. This is not Johnny Cochran getting an acquittal on a double murder trial for O.J. Simpson. This is very, very different. And I think it's so important and incumbent upon all of us to not lose sight of this, the seriousness, 10-year sentences, 10-year maximum with regards to those two prostitution charges. Now, obviously, had he been convicted on the RICO charges of sex trafficking, they carried longer sentences. The RICO could have been up to life in prison, based on a conviction on that very serious charge. What do you think Gerald, the judge, ultimately does? Here you have this music mogul. He's going to probably have a gazillion letters from people talking about all the charities that he's donated to and all the great things that he's done in his life. And then, as you said, the judge, who has been there for the entire trial, has heard about all of the reprehensible, violent conduct that he has engaged in over, decades. What's your prediction about the sentencing?
You never can tell with the judge, especially when they sit as the 13th juror and they hear everything. I'm sure his legal team will put up mitigation that we haven't seen before. As you stated, all the things that Sean Combs has done over the span of his lifetime, giving back to the community. But you also have to remember that the judge heard all that evidence. That her judge heard directly from the accusers, heard all of the federal government's evidence against him, and he's also going to hear that Diddy's never been convicted of anything. So he's got to weigh the character of the person in front of him and the charges that he was convicted of. And so I think that there will be a prison sentence. Some of the allegations were very difficult to stomach, and I'm telling you that as somebody who sat through 21 years of some of the worst crimes in Georgia, to hear some of the things that were happening with the baby oil and all the other stuff, and then, of course, to watch the disturbing video with Cassie being drugged through the hotel room, I think that's prison time. So I think it's probably going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 7, given his lack of any criminal history, but the severity of the crimes that he was convicted of. And I think that there will be a prison sentence. Now, his lawyers would be well to argue not for straight probation, but to argue for house arrest. Because, again, I think this is a custody case. And I think that if they don't come in with wide eyes and understanding where they are, he could end up in prison for a long time. So I think it's probably 5 to 7. I think they should argue probably for house arrest of some sort, but it'll be in that 5 to 7 range.
So, Nancy, a lot of references, like I said, there's O.J. Simpson reference. Also, there was a Bill Clinton reference made during some of the coverage that I was watching today. And someone says, if you mea culpa yourself enough, if you go on enough mea culpa tours, if you say I'm sorry enough, society is pretty forgiving, and that we may see those white parties reemerge. You live in New York. You know about the infamous Hamptons white parties and about the bigger than life image that Sean Combs had in the New York area. What do you think about that? Do you see a world in which after he serves whatever jail time he may or may not get, and he donates some money to domestic violence shelters, and he appears with his daughters and other women who say they've forgiven him, and he's in some kind of therapy, that society, welcomes him back to the picnic? I'll put it that way.
Well, look who got elected and sitting in the White House. A convicted rapist, and the administration is full of sex abusers. So it's hard to say that he can't get out of prison and be welcomed back. But I think things have changed since 1992, since Bill Clinton said, "I did not have sex with that woman." And that was consensual. There are other women complaining about Bill Clinton that seemed definitely not consensual, but he wasn't convicted of that. I do think we've come a long way since 1992. I would hope that after the allegations and the video, and we don't have a video of Bill Clinton beating someone up. We don't have that. I don't think that's a good analogy at all. I think that Harvey Weinstein's in prison. R. Kelly's in prison. Cosby was convicted, and that was overturned on a ridiculous basis with literally no legal basis at all by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. I think it's a mixed bag, Areva. I think we are seeing a backlash, but the people who are most involved in the backlash, the Trumpers, the MAGA people who are accepting sexual abuse, accepting Andrew Tate going to the White House, are not the people who are going to invite Sean Combs to their parties. I don't see him having a white party with a bunch of people in the Hamptons after he gets out of prison. I just don't see that. I hope that we've come past that just on the video and domestic violence alone.
All right, Dr. Dibinga, another reference. I've been following this so very closely, and this reference was to John Gotti. And they said, look, in the hip hop culture, when you quote unquote beat the government, when you stare the government down and you win, Sean Combs will now be known as the John Gotti of hip hop. So to the extent he wasn't already known as, the gangster of hip hop, this solidifies that position for him. What say ye about that analogy?
Well, I mean, a lot of hip hop of our era, a lot of these rappers, the Diddy's, well, he's not a rapper, people write for him, the Biggies, the Jay-Z's, all inspired by The Godfather and Scarface and the like. So it makes sense that people would make that type of reference. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. And this is part of the mythologizing of Diddy that we're starting to see happen. And my hope is that he's not able to just get back into society. Look, when he gets out at some point, he's a private citizen, he's able to live his life, but it doesn't mean that we have to support it. And I believe that if we start embracing these things about the, Gotti of the United States, or the new Gotti or whatever, then we're embracing a type of narrative that has never worked positively for hip hop. And that's part of the problem. And I'm very interested to see what Diddy is going to be doing when he gets out. I think that this country is a little bit less forgiving of black men. I do believe that, Kobe Bryant was never, convicted. They settled out of court. But when you look at Nate Parker and the allegations that came with him from the movie Birth of a Nation, when that came out, you look at Jonathan Majors, who did nothing even close to any of this. And he's still trying to recover his career. It's going to really remain to be seen what kind of influence Diddy really has to try to resurface some of his career. But to me, that's when the court of public opinion matters. And I'm hoping that he goes more the route of Kevin Spacey than some of these other people. I hope he fades into nothingness, and we show people once and for all that this type of behavior is not going to be tolerated within our community. We have to take accountability for what goes on within the hip hop world. It is a community that has generally escaped MeToo, but this is one instance where MeToo has caught one of them in some way, shape, or form. And there are more allegations out there for other people. Fat Joe, some of these other folks, more cases might be coming. This is something that we need to pay attention to.
Yeah, and I promise you I would tell you what my response was to my white female friend who made that statement about these white women taking on a black mogul and losing. I said to her, that's not how Black women are seeing this. And I said, you should be careful about making that statement on television or in the media because, as Nancy has said, we know women of color, Black women in particular, are the most forgotten, the most downtrodden people in our criminal justice system. And as a civil rights lawyer that's been representing women in sexual assault, sexual harassment cases for over 2 decades, I know, Nancy knows, all of us on this show know how difficult it is for Black women in particular to come forward. Gerald, you and I were just on a show about a story about a Black family, and we know just overall how difficult it is to even have our stories elevated for people to believe our stories. And no, I don't want to prosecute unfairly or unjustly a Black man or anyone for that point, but we were making some progress with Black women in our criminal justice system as it relates to sexual assaults and them being believed. And I just hope and pray that this doesn't discourage those victims from continuing to come forward. And I applaud Cassie, I applaud Jane, and all of the witnesses that had the courage and strength to testify, because not only were they going up against Diddy, they were going up against, those that love him, going up against social media and the critics on social media and ththose people that were threatening the witnesses and those that will make it difficult for certain people to work in the entertainment and the music industry. It is no picnic to have your life scrutinized in the way that these women did throughout this 6-week trial. So we have to continue to support and encourage victims. And I think one thing that we don't talk nearly enough about, Cassie Ventura was 19 years old when she met 37-year-old Sean Combs and entered into a relationship with him. The imbalance of power. She was a woman trying to make it in the entertainment industry, and he basically controlled her life, controlled every aspect of it. And there are people who will say she's a gold digger, she could have walked away. And I just hope that we have so much more education that's needed on how these powerful men manipulate and abuse women and how difficult it is for domestic violence victims to leave those toxic and violent relationships. We've got a lot of work to do. Again, no victory for Combs, his children, his family who are outside. I can understand they're happy. Their father may be coming home. Their son may be coming home. But at the end of the day, what we saw during that trial will leave an indelible mark on all of us. And it ain't a pretty thing to ever think about. The jury has spoken, and we're going to grapple with whether this was justice, and what does justice look like when you have someone that's so wealthy, so powerful, and a culture that unfortunately uplifts that power and that fame. Thank you so much, Gerald. Thank you, Erika. Thank you, Dr. Dibinga. Always a pleasure to be in conversation with you all. We're going to be following this case from the bail hearing to the sentencing hearing to the fallout to what continues to happen in the MeToo movement. We're going to continue to speak truth to power. That's the special report with Areva Martin.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. More information about the special report, follow me across all social platforms at Areva Martin. Subscribe to my YouTube page and share the special report.
Calling all BIPOC college students, recent college graduates, and clinicians. Here's my story about CORE, a unique workforce development program that is changing lives. My brother is the most caring person you will ever meet. With his autism diagnosis, my family had to fight to make sure that the resources he deserved were available. That's why my goal has always been to help children with developmental disabilities and give them chances my brother may have missed. So when I heard about the CORE Fellowship, I knew immediately it was for me. The fellowship opens doors for myself and others like me. They offer training, a stipend while you're learning, job placement, and they'll pay up to $10,000 of my student loan debt. The CORE Fellowship is going to allow me to achieve my life's purpose. They care about me, so I can care about others, like my brother. Visit the website to learn more about the CORE Fellowship. Discover your core passion, your power, and your purpose. Apply today.